After crossing the Aqueduct Pass in early afternoon, our party headed down into the Pachacutec Valley to make camp. As a condor flies, we'd only advanced 5 miles today, but we traveled up and down thousands of feet in elevation, back and forth along countless switchbacks, all the while gasping for oxygen in the thin air. This certainly wasn't the most difficult climb of my life, but it wasn't exactly a walk in the park either. The several hours I spent crossing the Pachacutec Valley rank among my favorite during the Moonstone Trek through southern Peru. Falling back from the rest of my team, I found myself alone in a vast and breathtaking landscape of glacier-topped mountains, colorful alpine slopes, clear running streams, and the occasional herd of llama and alpaca. I stopped often to film or take pictures, continually overwhelmed by the beauty and scale of my surroundings. My imagination began to run wild. To picture an ancient people like the Inca living here centuries ago was easy. As fog wreathed the hills around me, my thoughts grew increasingly fantastical. I half expected to see a dragon circling above, or a band of elves resting in a grove of flowers, or an angry giant hurling boulders at me from behind a distant peak. Halfway down the valley, I spotted several stone ruins of corrals and farmhouses. According to my guide, these were at least as old as the Inca, if not older. I was impressed by his knowledge of Peru's history, which was both broad and deep. He told me he's read many books about the Inca and their ancestors, and over several years of trekking this route, he's also tried to learn as much as he can about its various features and landmarks. Having done a bit of research myself prior to this trip, I noted that the books my guide quoted were mostly written by authors with which I was unfamiliar. They seemed to be local, or at least not members of the Royal Geographic Society. When I asked him why he consulted Peruvian experts, he smiled and said something along the lines of, "History is written by the victors." After returning to the States, I examined some of the works he mentioned, including those written by self-taught scholars like Maria Rostorowski. I gathered that my guide was correct. These books do seem to shed fresh and unique light on a subject that's been dominated by the theories of eminent 19th and 20th century American and European archaeologists and explorers. Of course, I knew none of this at the time. Alone with my thoughts as I descended the valley, I reflected only upon what I'd learned prior to and during my trip to Peru. After 2 years of historical research, I'd come here to see the land of the Incas with my own eyes. Initially, my observations during the previous week in Cusco validated what I already knew. However, bit by bit, new questions and doubts were beginning to chip away at this foundation. My visits to the Huayraqpunku and Sacsayhuaman had made me skeptical of the theories by modern archaeologists and historians, who claim positively that the Inca Empire and its incredible architecture was assembled in less than 100 years by a society without iron tools, work animals, or the wheel. Is it possible that this understanding of Inca history rests upon many mistaken assumptions? After all, nearly everything we know about the Inca is derived from the accounts written by a handful of Spanish chroniclers nearly 5 centuries ago, each of whom undoubtedly possessed his own biases and reasons for distorting the truth about this land. In the early years of the Spanish conquest, most important Inca sites were destroyed or significantly transformed, as they were considered unwelcome reminders of the toppled political regime, or as symbols of a now forbidden pagan religion. What sites survived the Spaniards were smashed by earthquakes or looted by generations of huaqueros, or grave robbers, destructive forces that both continue today. And despite the modern-day fame of sites like Machu Picchu, archaeology has only just begun to unravel the mysteries of Peru and South America. To date, no comprehensive archaeological investigation of Cusco has ever been completed, and new sites are being discovered throughout Peru every year. Finally, we should keep in mind that the Incas themselves may have destroyed many ancient sites, as well as invented or reinvented stories about their origins and meaning. After all, the Incas were conquerors too, and relative newcomers in the grand scheme of Peru's history. The Inca undoubtedly utilized propaganda to expand their new empire in the 1400s and early 1500s under the leadership of Pachacutec, the great Inca king, whose adopted name means "he who overturns space and time." Is it so hard to believe that he effected a Pachacutec, or turning over of the world, when he came to power? Given that popular versions of Peru's history are really just theories based on incomplete evidence, it seems more sensible to stay open-minded and even skeptical about what really happened here. We halted around dusk in a narrow basin at the foot of the valley. Once again, our muleteers had tents pitched and water boiling for tea when we staggered into camp. As I settled in and organized my gear, I noticed one of the cooks building a fire in a stone-lined pit across the field. It was already blazing high when he called our team over to witness an ancient tradition in the Andes, Pachamanca. In the Quechua language, Pacha means earth and Manca means pot. Standing around the fire, we watched the cooks place a pig and potatoes into the coals, cover it in plastic tarp, and then pile rocks and dirt on top. A couple hours later, we returned to the spot where the cooks uncovered our dinner. That night, we ate the Peruvian equivalent of a smoked hog, altogether an exquisite spread whose preparation was made even more remarkable considering that our muleteers had packed all the ingredients in on horseback. That night I lay down under the Milky Way, which this far from the lights of civilization shone in its full glory. Gazing up at the sky, I felt like I was floating among the stars and celestial dust, rather than being attached to solid Earth. This connection, a perceived linkage between Earth and sky, was appreciated by the Incas and their ancestors as well. Numerous sites in Peru are built with geocosmic alignments, with streets, walls, doors, and windows oriented towards constellations, solstice and equinox sunrises and sunsets, and zeniths. The architecture of these places suggests that the people of Peru have studied and worshipped the cosmos for ages, as ancient people did all around the world. The question is, why did people do this? Perhaps only to predict the weather or schedule plantings and harvests. Maybe rulers and their astronomer priests wanted to understand celestial phenomena so they could perform exhibits that would impress their subjects. It's often been suggested that they simply invented myths and rituals to understand their place in a universe that was beyond their ability to reason. In other words, since they didn't know any better, they prescribed supernatural or otherwise superfluous meanings to the earth and sky. But then again, perhaps they had a deeper understanding of the relationship between the universe and the soul, between celestial processes and their own physical existence, experiences, and thoughts in this life. While the science-based viewpoints of historians and archaeologists have their roles in understanding these beliefs and related archaeological evidence, I think the mystics do as well. Astrologists, cosmologists, metaphysicists, and shamans. Science is invaluable for unraveling the mysteries of the past, but alone it may not be sufficient for grasping the deeper meaning of these places. To understand the connection between natural phenomena and ancient beliefs, along with the architecture it inspired, perhaps we too must adopt an investigative mindset that blends science and spirituality. Dawn broke with sunshine and a heavy frost upon the ground. After coffee and another delicious breakfast, we set off for our next destination, the Sacred Valley.
We just left camp. The muleteers are breaking it down and we'll be along shortly. We're heading down in elevation. We're going to go right through that gap and into a canyon below.
Descending to the bottom of the Pachacutec Valley, we entered a vale of dense vegetation and gurgling streams. It was like we'd stepped through a portal that instantly conveyed us from mountain to jungle. This contrast would certainly have been noted by ancient travelers too, and perhaps it was even assigned its own function in ritual. Perhaps this leg of the trail symbolized descent from the upper world, or Hanan Pacha, which is governed by the condor and the higher self, to the lower world, or Uku Pacha, where the serpent and subconscious reign supreme. With this possibility in mind, I kept my eyes peeled for potential Wak'as, or sacred places, as I moved through this granite-lined labyrinth of trees, waterfalls, and caverns.
It's just really a cool place. I can't remember what those are called, but those have special importance in Incan and pre-Spanish and Andean spiritual beliefs.
Our exit from the canyon was just as sudden, presenting us with another extreme juxtaposition of landscape. From the jungle, we emerged onto one end of a long, steeply sided valley lined by jagged mountains. The ribbon of trail clung to the high-angle slope, continuing around a bend and out of sight. At this point, as we started down the zigzagging path, I was very glad I had brought trekking poles. Several days ago I'd been reluctant to use them, but going downhill is torture on the knees, much worse than going uphill in my opinion, and I silently thanked my guide over and over for his gentle insistence back in Cusco that I at least bring them along. At mid-morning we halted atop an outcrop with a splendid view of Mount Veronica, also called Wak'a, and the Urubamba Range. Everywhere you look in Peru, there seems to be yet another, even more extraordinary sight than before. I reminded myself that I had only seen a sliver of this country, and that views like this might be found throughout the rest of the country, to say nothing of the continent and world. Ah, the traveler's dilemma. So much to see and do, never enough time or money. Taking up the trek once more, we stumbled upon another interesting juxtaposition, this time between old and new.
I wanted to pause and point out this water line. It goes all the way over the mountain behind me, all the way back to that valley with the waterfall that we'd confronted a few miles back. So a few minutes ago we saw the modern aqueduct system from the mountains by the stream where we started over to the Sacred Valley. Well, this is the original aqueduct system. You can see this is just a stone construction. It's not used anymore. But you can see that it runs all the way around then. And if you see this line here, you can see it goes all the way around. The grade is consistent all the way around and on to the next mountain. It's really an incredible engineering feat.
An hour later, and several thousand feet lower on the trail, I looked back up at this system and my respect for Inca engineering grew. Though the aqueduct extended for many miles across rocky terrain, it maintained a remarkably even grade. The angle was such that water flowed at just the right speed, never too fast or slow, never ceasing, never overflowing its edges. Adjacent to the canal was a boulder-strewn outcrop. Something about it seized my attention. The longer I stared, the more I thought the outlines of the rocks resembled the shapes of the distant mountains. Were these replication stones? I had read that the Inca often carved boulders into such stones as shrines to the mountain Apus, or spirit gods. One of the most famous replication stones lies at Machu Picchu, but these stones have been found other places as well. During the rest of my trek, I kept my eyes open for such stones and spotted many, taking pictures where I found them. Lunch was served on a flat, grassy hill that overlooked the Sacred Valley, which is cut by the Urubamba or Vilcanota River. Across the river, situated at its convergence with a tributary stream, lay our destination, the town of Ollantaytambo. I'd been here 100 times in books and on Google Earth. Now I shook with excitement knowing the incredible sight was just a day away. This was a fortress where in 1536 the last Inca king, Manco Inca, and his army briefly held out against the Spanish conquistadors before retreating to the last hidden refuge in the Vilcabamba region. Ollantaytambo was a place of megalithic walls, gateways, and terraces, an ancient place rebuilt by the Incas, a place once as sacred as it is now mysterious. Hitting the trail again, we made for a campsite near Pachacutec, the quarry for Ollantaytambo's stones. We would visit this site after dinner, but first our guide would take us to one of the most inspirational landmarks in all the Sacred Valley, the Sun Gate of Huayraqpunku. Huayraqpunku is the ruins of a shrine set atop a ridge overlooking the Sacred Valley. It's notable not only for its expansive view, but also because it contains a double-jamb doorway, a feature that distinguishes it as an important Inca site. Approaching up a stairway, one passes through the door into a small space enclosed by low walls. A few niches adorn the interior space, including one with holes bored through the rock, meaning it was perhaps used for securing ropes. Most fascinating about Huayraqpunku is that its doorway perfectly frames Mount Veronica, which can also be seen from Machu Picchu.
Behind you, Veronica Mountain. Yeah. Veronica Mountain, my friend, is actually a new name, but the typical name, my friend, is Wak'a in Quechua. Wak'a means sacred tears. Yes.
Even more intriguing is that this sacred mountain lies precisely north of Huayraqpunku, yet another example of the geocosmic alignments woven into the architecture of the Inca and many other ancient civilizations. After arriving at our campsite, where we deposited the majority of our gear and refilled water bottles, we headed for Pachacutec. According to archaeologists, this talus field below Cerro Yanarca is the source of stones at Ollantaytambo. The methods by which these blocks were hewn, shaped, and hauled across the river to the ancient city are not known, but several theories have been offered up. You can see what's left today. We've got these long, sort of rectangular columns that may have been used for who knows what. But the idea was that, at least according to some folks, that granite was split along veins using a method of drilling holes in the rock, filling it with waterlogged wood, which expanded over, or not waterlogged, but wetted wood that became waterlogged, expanded over time and split the rock. And then the rock was moved downhill on rollers, either stone rollers or perhaps wooden rollers, down earthen ramps, or maybe some sort of a ramp switchback type system. The whole process probably involved thousands of workers. And that's really the prevailing theory about how the Incas moved these large stones, because again, they did not have the wheel, at least not for any purpose related to transportation or construction. So just a lot of people, a lot of manual labor would have been required to get these massive stones, which weighed up to, at Sacsayhuaman, up to 300 tons, here probably up to 20 or 50 tons, down this hill, across Urubamba, into Ollantaytambo. Near the quarry, we discovered a cave with human skeletons. Our guide explained that these may have been quarry workers. In any case, locals regard such places today as the sacred burial sites of their ancestors, and following the lead of our guide, we respectfully offered coca leaves in tribute. As the shadows lengthened, we returned to our campsite for another delicious meal and some well-deserved rest. Every day of this trek seemed more amazing than the one before. Today I had been treated to breathtaking views of mountains, lush thickets, and a hallowed valley. I had examined ruins of farms, shrines, aqueducts, ancient quarries, and burial chambers. Tonight, I slept at the foot of Mount Veronica and under the Milky Way. And tomorrow, I would enter the great city of Ollantaytambo, the city of the Watchtower, and one of the most important archaeological sites in all Peru.